United States is planning to fund Marines for $125 million to buy 48 Tomahawk missiles from next year to deploy long-range, ground-launched cruise missiles in the Asia-Pacific region focusing on South China Sea. As Washington and Beijing trade barbs over the coronavirus pandemic, a longer-term struggle between the two Pacific powers is at a turning point, as the United States rolls out new weapons and strategy in a bid to close a wide missile gap with China. The United States has largely stood by in recent decades as China dramatically expanded its military firepower. Now, having shed the constraints of a Cold War-era arms control treaty, the Trump administration is planning to deploy long-range, ground-launched cruise missiles in the Asia-Pacific region. The Pentagon intends to arm its Marines with versions of the Tomahawk cruise missile now carried on U.S. warships, according to the White House budget requests for 2021 and congressional testimony in March of senior U.S. military commanders. It is also accelerating deliveries of its first new long-range anti-ship missiles in decades. The U.S. moves are aimed at countering China's overwhelming advantage in land-based cruise and ballistic missiles. The Pentagon also intends to dial back China's lead in what strategists refer to as the range war, the People's Liberation Army. China's military has built up a huge force of missiles that mostly outrange those of the U.S. and its regional allies, according to senior U.S. commanders and strategic advisors to the Pentagon, who have been warning that China holds a clear advantage in these weapons. And, in a radical shift in tactics, the Marines will join forces with the U.S. Navy in attacking an enemy's warships. Small and mobile units of U.S. Marines armed with anti-ship missiles will become ship killers. In a conflict, these units will be dispersed at key points in the Western Pacific and along the so-called First Island Chain, Commander said. The First Island Chain is the string of islands that run from the Japanese archipelago, through Taiwan, the Philippines and on to Borneo, enclosing China's coastal seas. The Commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, General David Berger, told the Senate Armed Services Committee that small units of Marines armed with precision missiles could assist the U.S. Navy to gain control of the seas, particularly in the Western Pacific. The Tomahawk missile is one of the tools that is going to allow us to do that. The Tomahawk, which first gained fame when launched in massed strikes during the 1991 Gulf War, has been carried on U.S. warships and used to attack land targets in recent decades. The Marines would test-fire the cruise missile through 2022 with the aim of making it operational the following year, top Pentagon commanders testified. At first, a relatively small number of land-based cruise missiles will not change the balance of power. But such a shift would send a strong political signal that Washington is preparing to compete with China's massive arsenal, according to senior U.S. and other Western strategists. Longer term, bigger numbers of these weapons combined with similar Japanese and Taiwanese missiles would pose a serious threat to Chinese forces, they say. The biggest immediate threat to the PLA comes from new, long-range anti-ship missiles now entering service with U.S. Navy and Air Force strike aircraft. A Chinese military spokesman, Senior Colonel Wu Qian, warned that Beijing would not stand by if Washington deployed land-based, long-range missiles in the Asia-Pacific region. China's foreign ministry accused the United States of sticking to its Cold War mentality and constantly increasing military deployment in the region. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy was forced to tie up the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt at Guam while it battles to contain a coronavirus outbreak among the crew of the giant warship. However, the U.S. Navy managed to maintain a powerful presence off the Chinese coast. The guided missile destroyer USS Berry passed through the Taiwan Strait twice in April. and the amphibious assault ship USS America last month exercised in the East China Sea and South China Sea. The series also revealed that in most categories, China's missiles now rival or outperform counterparts in the armories of the U.S. alliance. China derived an advantage because it was not party to a Cold War-era treaty, the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, that banned the United States and Russia from possessing ground-launched ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges from 500 kilometers to 5,500 kilometers. Unrestrained by the INF Pact, China has deployed about 2,000 of these weapons, according to U.S. and other Western estimates. This accumulated firepower has shifted the regional balance of power in China's favor. The United States, long the dominant military power in Asia, can no longer be confident of victory in a military clash in waters off the Chinese coast, according to senior retired U.S. military officers. The Pentagon tested a ground-launched Tomahawk cruise missile. In December, it tested a ground-launched ballistic missile. The INF Treaty banned such ground-launched weapons, and thus both tests would have been forbidden. The budget documents show that the Marines have requested $125 million to buy 48 Tomahawk missiles from next year. The Tomahawk has a range of 1,600 kilometers, according to its manufacturer, Raytheon Company. Marines had successfully tested a new shorter-range anti-ship weapon, the Naval Strike Missile, from a ground launcher and would conduct another test. If that test was successful, the Marines intended to order 36 of these missiles in 2022. The U.S. Army is also testing a new long-range, land-based missile that can target warships. This missile would have been prohibited under the INF Treaty. The Defense Department also has research underway on new, long-range strike weapons, with a budget request of $3.2 billion for hypersonic technology, mostly for missiles. Deploying ground-based U.S. and Allied missiles in the island chain would pose a similar threat to Chinese warships to vessels operating in the South China Sea, East China Sea and Yellow Sea, or ships attempting to break out into the Western Pacific. Japan and Taiwan have already deployed ground-based anti-ship missiles for this purpose. The Pentagon is already moving to boost the firepower of its existing strike aircraft in Asia. U.S. Navy Super Hornet jets and Air Force B-1 bombers are now being armed with early deliveries of Lockheed Martin's new long-range anti-ship missile, according to the budget request documents. The new missile is being deployed in response to an urgent operational need for the U.S. Pacific Command, the documents explain. The new missile carries a 450-kilogram warhead and is capable of semi-autonomous targeting, giving it some ability to steer itself, according to the budget request. Details of the stealthy cruise missile's range are classified, but U.S. and other Western military officials estimate it can strike targets at distances greater than 800 kilometers. This new anti-ship missile is derived from an existing Lockheed long-range, land attack weapon, the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile. The Pentagon is asking for $577 million next year to order another 400 of these land attack missiles. For the U.S. Navy in Asia, Super Hornet jets operating from aircraft carriers and armed with the new anti-ship missile would deliver a major boost in firepower while allowing the expensive warships to operate further away from potential threats. Current and retired U.S. Navy officers have been urging the Pentagon to equip American warships with longer-range anti-ship missiles that would allow them to compete with the latest, heavily armed Chinese cruisers, destroyers and frigates. Lockheed has said it successfully test-fired one of the new long-range anti-ship missiles from the type of launcher used on U.S. and Allied warships.